Okay, our scripture reading today is John chapter 15 verses 9 through 18 and Daniel chapter 6 verses 1 through 4. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. And greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. And Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him up over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and to the hearing of his word. Okay, we're on this journey, the way of the cross, as we're walking through and journeying through Lent here, heading toward Easter, as Jesus journeyed really from the time of his temptation to the time of his crucifixion. From the time of his baptism to the time of his crucifixion was the way of the cross. And he walked that way long before he was crucified. And we began this series at almost the very beginning. His temptation in the wilderness was right after his baptism. And we're jumping now to almost the very end, the night before Jesus was crucified. And in these words that Jesus shared with his disciples at that time, at the heart of them was this, and he repeated it twice in these short verses, which is his command, that he wants his joy to be in them as the Father's joy is in him. He wants their joy to be complete, and to do that, they must do the commands that he gives them as he's done his Father's commands, and his command is this: love one another. Love one another as I have loved you. And to define and describe that love, Jesus offers this: no greater love has anyone than this, than that they lay down their life for their friends. Now, Jesus was about to literally lay down his life for those friends. The next day he would be crucified, he would die, he would literally lay down and give up his physical life for his friends. Most of us, for good or ill, don't get that opportunity to lay down our lives in that way. Most people, and I think this is good news, most of us will not have the opportunity to choose to die for someone else. So what does that command then mean to us? What does this guidance from Jesus mean for all of those people who don't get to die for someone? How do we lay down our lives for the people around us? That's what we're looking at over the next few sermons here. In a couple weeks, we're going to look at how do we lay down our lives for our friends and our family. And the simple fact is this: if we can't lay down our lives for our friends and our family, we're not going to be laying down our lives for other people. All right? Then next Sunday, we're going to look at laying down our lives in sports and in play. And I got to say this, having watched youth sports from the time that I was a child and playing youth sports up to having my children through youth sports, if parents can lay down their lives at sports, they can lay down their lives anywhere. All right? And then today, we're looking at how do we lay down our lives at work and at school. And I'm including school in there because even though I used to hear when I was a student a lot. School is preparation for adulthood, and you're being launched into adulthood, and this is all preparation for that. I've got some exciting news for everyone, especially for the kids in the back. Students are alive. You are alive. You are living life now. You don't have to wait till you graduate to live life. And you don't have to wait till you graduate to lay down your life. And we're going to see today that the Bible talks about laying down our lives not only at work, but also at school. Although school was a little bit different then. So that's the focus today. And the question then is, wrong button. Boy, I'm hitting all sorts of wrong buttons today. What does laying down your life, LDYL will be the abbreviation on the slides for shortness sake, brevity's sake. What does it look like at school and at work? Practically speaking, what does that mean? If it doesn't mean dying for someone, what does it mean? What does it look like? And I think the best place we can look for that in the Bible is the book of Daniel. Laying down your life at school and at work looks like Daniel. Let's take a look at these words. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Okay, the king here is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar II, I believe, to be very, very specific. He's the king of Babylon, the emperor of the Babylonian Empire. They have conquered Israel. And one of their policies whenever the Babylonians conquered was they would deport. They would do mass deportations. Force people out of their homes, out of their homelands, and take them away from their families. And this did a couple of things. It got them a lot of new workers in Babylon. And we will be honest, they were slaves. They were made to work. They did not volunteer for international studies. They were taken and forcibly taken to Babylon. The other thing it did, it got them out of their home country, so they couldn't do things like stir up revolts and rebellions. They would take the leadership, the brightest, the ones most likely to be most effective at causing trouble and creating opposition in their home country. They would take them out, take them to Babylon, and re-educate them and make them servants of the Babylonian Empire instead of servants of their homeland. 4 of those folks, one was Daniel, one was Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Now, Daniel, you've probably heard that name before. You may have heard Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael before. You might know them better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which were the names that their Babylonian captors gave them. Their Hebrew names were Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Because I love VeggieTales, know them as Rack, Shack, and Benny. But that's a different story, and that's dating myself. So they were taken to Babylon to be re-educated. And from the Babylonians' perspective, just to be educated. Babylon was a very advanced empire. They would almost certainly have looked down upon the Hebrews as barbarians and had to be brought up to snuff to be allowed to serve in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. So Ashpenaz was the headmaster of this school where these folks were taken, the royal family and the nobility. And it says, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. So 3 years of school, and then they had to go to work. And they were working for the king. Daniel himself ended up working very, very close to the king in the palace of the king. But they had to go to school first. So the book of Daniel is about work and it is about school. Interesting thing, Daniel is not entirely unique, but he's certainly different from the norm when it comes to prophets in the Bible. Daniel is considered one of the greatest prophets. But many of the prophets, being a prophet, seem to be their full-time job. Jeremiah was part of the priestly class, priestly family. When he wasn't working as a prophet, he was still a clergy. He was working as a priest. John the Baptist was part of a priestly family. and his full-time job seemed to be being a prophet. Others, like Moses, his full-time job was being a prophet, leading the people of Israel from Egypt, slavery in Egypt, to freedom in the promised land. The prophets, that seemed to be, for many, if not most of them, kind of their full-time gig. Daniel had a day job. Daniel had a day job. His job was, he was a very high-level executive in the Babylonian Empire. A very powerful, very influential, very important person with a great deal of responsibility working for Nebuchadnezzar and other Babylonian kings. Not really going to talk about Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael today. But to be able to do that, he had to go to school. He went to school. He learned Babylonian culture. He learned Babylonian language. He learned Babylonian literature and wisdom to prepare him to be a servant in the palace of the king. And that's the setup. So what we get in Daniel is not the life of a professional clergy person. What we get in the book of Daniel is the life of someone who had a secular job but was intent on staying faithful to God while he worked for an ungodly boss in a very ungodly organization and surrounded by ungodly people. And I don't really mean that ungodly pejoratively, like, it's just reality. Nebuchadnezzar was a devout worshiper of the god Marduk, the chief of the Babylonian gods. Nebuchadnezzar employed and consulted astrologers and magicians and probably consulted books of magic and astrology on his own. They did things that the law of Moses, which Daniel knew very well, were a complete violation of that. The deportations themselves violated the law of Moses, which commanded kindness and compassion for foreigners among you. And there was Nebuchadnezzar doing those things, and Daniel was one of his top people, one of the highest level people in the entire kingdom, working for this king who asked people at times to worship him as a god. And Daniel works to support him and his kingdom and his administration. A secular job, a very secular job. But Daniel seeking to be godly within that. How did Daniel lay down his life while he was working for Nebuchadnezzar and other kings? First of all, before I get to the first of all, first of all, I don't think I'm going to say anything today that's surprising to anybody. Some sermons, sometimes there's new stuff there and you go, oh, whoa, never thought about that. I think everything I say from this point on, you're going to go, well, yeah, we knew that. That's good. Sometimes sermons need to be that too, where we remind ourselves of things that we already know, and that's where we are today. So reminding us of things we already know. Laying down your life, what's that look like? Laying down your life at work and at school looks like doing your work, including your school work, faithfully, well, and honestly. Faithfully, well, and honestly. Not slacking on the job, not doing shoddy work at school or shoddy work at work, not skimming off the top, not cheating, not stealing, but being faithful, doing your work well, and doing your work honestly. Let's take a look at Daniel in that. A couple of different things here. We're going to look at Daniel later on in the book of Daniel. This is not Nebuchadnezzar. This is a different king. Darius is what he's called. Historically, this particular king, we can't find specific mention of him in other places, so we don't really know more about him than what we read in the Bible. But at this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. This picks up right after what I read, or at the end of what I read earlier. So the king has divided up rule among satraps. He's made the satraps accountable to 3 administrators because he doesn't want the satraps ripping them off, so the administrators are supposed to keep them in line. And Daniel is one of those 3 administrators. Daniel does his work so well that Darius decides, you know what? I'm going to make Daniel second in charge after me, and everyone's got to answer to him except me. And the other administrators and all of the satraps were unhappy with this, so they wanted to get Daniel fired. They didn't want Daniel to be over them. And so they looked for some things they could accuse Daniel on, to go to Darius and say, look, he's not qualified, he can't do the job, you can't trust him. They looked for anything they could find to accuse Daniel on. And this is what we are told. They tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Here's Daniel, who was at this point in his life, maybe decades since he first started working for King Nebuchadnezzar. And here's Daniel, who has done his work so well and so honestly that there's nothing anyone can say about his work. Even his enemies can't find anything in his work to criticize him about. And government corruption and corruption of government officials is nothing new. That's been going on as long as there have been governments. People skim off the top. People do paybacks. They take bribes. They take kickbacks. They buy favors. They do all kinds of things. When you have that much power and access to that much wealth and many people trying to buy your access and your influence and your authority as well, they couldn't find any corruption. Anything to accuse. Daniel could have made it through a joint session of congressional hearings and everyone was going, yeah, you're right, nothing. We got nothing. You never hear that. No one ever gets approved like that. But even Daniel's enemies couldn't find reasons to bring charges against him because he was trustworthy and he was competent. He did his work well and he did it honestly. The Bible is very concerned about that for school and work, that we do things well and we do it honestly. There are at least 5 places in the Bible that talk about honesty in our business and in our work. And probably more if you dig, but there are 5 that mention specific kinds of honesty. In Deuteronomy, that's the earliest one that I found. Do not have 2 differing weights in your bag, one heavy and one light. Do not have 2 differing measures in your house, one large and one small. You must have accurate and honest weights and measures so that you may live long in the land and land your God is giving you. For the Lord your God detests anyone who does these things, anyone who deals dishonestly. What's this difference? What is he talking about? Different weights and different measures. Well, imagine you are a trade in grain. And we'll use modern measures that we can understand. You've got a scoop that's a 1-quart scoop. And so you go to buy your grain and you're getting a scoop of grain. And so you're going to scoop out your grain. But you actually have 2 scoops. And one of them is a little bigger than a quart and one of them is a little less than a quart. And you have the little bigger one, and the difference is so small you can't really tell just by looking at them. So when you're buying your grain and you're paying for 1 quart, you're scooping out a little more than a quart. But when you're selling your grain and someone's buying a quart from you, you use the small scoop and you scoop out a little less than a quart. And it's not much, but when you do it a lot, you make a little money by cheating people a little bit. We have this kind of thing happening in business practices all the time. That's why we have class action lawsuits, because sometimes the damage done to an individual is so small, it's not worth suing over. But when you add it up across thousands of individuals, you make a lot of money. Or you steal a lot of money. The same with weights. You have a weight that's a little less than a pound or a weight that's a little more than a pound, and you use that depending on which side of the transaction that you're on. God says he detests that. And he makes this promise. Have honest weights and measures that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Do you remember what other commandment that promise is tied to? Anyone remember? Pop quiz. Points are available. Points don't matter, but they are available. What commandment is that tied to? That promise. Honor your father and your mother, that you may live long in the land that the Lord God has given you. This is at least one other commandment that promise is tied to. This is incredibly important, and there are at least 4 other places in the Bible that specifically talk about honest weights and measures. God is very, very concerned with this. But it's not just there. When we get John the Baptist in the New Testament, John's out there preaching. His message is strong. He doesn't pull any punches. Bad stuff's coming. God's coming for final judgment. You better be ready. If you're not ready, you're going to suffer, and you need to repent to get ready. And people were listening, and they said to John, what do we do? One of the groups that came and listened to John preaching were the tax collectors. People around them would have, the good church people would have thought the tax collectors were scumbags, and their response would likely have been, you need to quit being a tax collector. You're working for the Roman government, the pagans that have invaded our country. You're exploiting your own people. Stop being a tax collector. That's not what John said. John said to the tax collectors, don't collect more than you are required to. Do your job, but do it honestly. We know the Roman government allows tax collectors to collect more. We know that you get to keep that. We know that some tax collectors are making themselves rich doing that. If you're going to work for the Romans, work for the Romans honestly. Honestly. The soldiers came to him and said, what should we do? John replied, don't extort money. Don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay. Soldiers here functioning more like police officers. Hey, what was that? Cocaine that I found in your back seat? What do you mean you didn't put it there? Well, I didn't put it there, but I'll make it go away. If you give me a little money, we can forget all about this. Corruption by people in power is nothing new. They were doing it then as they're doing it now. And John didn't say quit the job. John said do your job honestly. How do you repent and prepare for the coming of the Messiah? Do your job honestly. One of the ways to lay down our life. Laying down your life looks like staying faithful to God's way, even while working faithfully, well, and honestly for or with ungodly people. I already said before, Nebuchadnezzar and the other kings of Babylon would have been, objectively speaking, this is not throwing stones. They would have agreed with me if I said this. They were ungodly people, as the Bible defines godliness. They worshiped a whole pantheon of different gods. They did say, hey, at times no one's allowed to insult the God of Daniel. Can't talk bad about that God, but they still worshiped other gods. They asked to be worshiped as gods at times. How do you work faithfully, well, and honestly for ungodly people? This is what that looks like. How do you stay faithful to God's way while working for an ungodly company or with ungodly people? Daniel faced that right from the very beginning. When they were in that school, the king provided food. These people were going to have important positions in his palace. He wanted them to be healthy. He wanted them to be well fed. He provided the best of foods for them. And Daniel said, you know what? That's great. But a lot of this food they're providing, I'm not allowed to eat. My God has told my people that we can't eat that food. And there's a lot of other things that the law would have required that they would not have been able to do because they were in service to the king of Babylon. They would have been able to worship the way God commanded them to worship. The temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians. And even if it existed, it was way back in Jerusalem. So they couldn't offer the sacrifices. They couldn't do the kind of things they were supposed to do in worship. Probably, we don't know for sure, probably they would have been able to follow the restrictions on how they cut their hair and how they wore their clothes while they were working in the Babylonian court as well. And so Daniel will say, how can we stay? We want to stay faithful to God however we can in this context. What can we do? And he said, you know what? A lot of the food the king is providing we can eat. We can eat the vegetables. We can eat the fruits. We can't eat the meats. We can't drink the wine. We can eat the vegetables and the fruits and drink the water. And so he didn't go and make a demand. He didn't stand up and wave a flag and, I'm a follower of God. I have to, see how godly and holy I am. He went to the headmaster and he asked permission. He showed humility in his desire to stay as godly as he could possibly be in that context. And he asked permission to be able to do it. He did it with humility. At work, that's what it looks like. And at school. Sometimes at work and at school, particularly in some places of work, if you're a public school teacher, and most of the United States of America, there's still some places where you can be really open about your faith, but in most you can't. And yet there are a lot of godly people that work in those environments, and they have to find ways. There are a lot of workplaces where it's like, look, we're just not doing the religion thing at all here. We got a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. You can believe what you want to believe, but kind of keep it to yourself. How do we live godly lives? With humility and with grace and with compassion, we find ways to be godly even when we're around people that aren't. Even when we're around people that aren't. Then, laying down your life also looks like praying about your work and about your school. There is no law anywhere against praying in the United States. In schools, teachers aren't allowed to lead students in prayer, but teachers can pray. No one can stop a teacher from praying silently for their class, for their students, for family members. That's not against the law. Not against the law. Students can pray. Students can lead other people to pray. Daniel was praying in his work. We see it at two different places very explicitly. One of the things that happened very early on after Daniel graduated was made one of the wise men in Nebuchadnezzar's court. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He couldn't get any of his wise men, his astrologers, his sorcerers, his magicians to interpret his dream. They didn't know the answer. And so Nebuchadnezzar had a very harsh employment policy, did not fit with fair labor practices or OSHA. And he said, all right, y'all, if you're going to say you're wise men and you can do these kinds of things and I'm going to keep you on the payroll, if you can't do it, I'm just going to kill you. And that's what he said. You can't interpret my dream. Why am I paying you? Why am I providing you housing and food? You're all going to die. And Daniel went back to Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, said, we got a problem, and we might die unless someone can interpret this dream for Nebuchadnezzar. And this is what happened. Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. They prayed about it. They had a work problem. Their king needed an explanation for his dream. He needed that service, and no one else in the company could provide that service. And they prayed. They prayed about their work that they had to do for the pagan king so he could be better at leading his pagan kingdom. And they prayed about their work. Later on, Daniel did the same thing. They couldn't find any reason to accuse Daniel based on his work, based on his integrity. They trapped him with his faith. So they got King Darius to issue a law that for the next 30 days, no one is allowed to pray to anyone but Darius. And this is what happens. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. That last phrase is essential. This Daniel was not praying as an act of rebellion against the king or the people that were trying to trap him. He was not praying and opening up his window and praying where people could see him so people could see what a good Christian, well, he was a good, faithful Jewish guy he was. He was doing it because that's what he'd always been doing. That was his habit. That was his practice, to pray 3 times a day. And the law wasn't going to stop him from doing that. Prayer was a part of his life. He prayed about his work, and I'm sure he prayed about his family and about his friends, and he prayed about the restoration of Israel and the return to the promised land. I'm sure he prayed about all of those things. But the point was that he was praying consistently. He was praying regularly, and he made prayer part of his life. Laying down your life looks like praying for your work and for your school. And laying down your life looks like giving credit and praise to God and humbly recognizing that your success comes from Him. Let's see that. Now God caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. That's the headmaster at the school. The one who we went to ask permission to only eat the things that they were allowed by the law of Moses to eat. And he went and asked permission instead of demanding. But before any of that ever happened, we're told in the book that God had caused the official to show favor to Daniel. Daniel, it took a great amount of courage and a great amount of integrity and a great amount of faithfulness for Daniel to even ask. But for him to get permission, it took God working in the heart of that headmaster to give Daniel favor with him. God did the work in there. Daniel asked, but God made it possible. Then later, when there was another issue, there was handwriting on the wall. There's a different king. And the story of the handwriting on the wall, once again, none of the wise men could read the writing or explain what happened. The king promised a reward to anyone that could. This is what happened. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals..." I'm sorry, this is not the later one. I'm mixing it up. Get to later. This is still the first dream with Nebuchadnezzar. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in your bed are these. Then he interpreted it. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. This was the prayer. He went to Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. We need to pray about this. God answered their prayer, gave them the interpretation of the dream. But when they went to Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel went to Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't say, "Hey, man," he didn't flex. He didn't posture. He didn't brag. He didn't throw shade on the others. All he did was say, "I'm not any smarter than anybody else. This came from God." He recognized that his success in his job came not from him, it came from God. He was still working hard, working competently, working faithfully, working honestly, but he knew that the success he was experiencing was a blessing from God. Knowing that, humbly working, not shining a light on our own selves so that we can get praise and admiration from the people around us, but giving the credit and the praise to God. And that also means not working for earthly rewards. Now I got to tell you, Daniel was getting paid. Daniel was getting paid. He was at some point reached the second highest level of authority in the kingdom. He had his food, he had his clothing, he had his housing, all provided by the king, very likely getting a salary as well in all of that. But so I'm not saying we all need to go out there and work without getting paid. My wife and I are in two very different positions. I've been doing what I love to do for decades. I love pastoring, I love preaching. Don't tell the board this. This is between you and me. Don't tell the board this, but I would do this kind of work even if I wasn't getting paid. Don't tell anyone. You all do pay me. You pay me very generously, and I'm very grateful for that. My wife works for Nestle. She works for the paycheck. She doesn't love Nestle. She's not so devoted to chocolate. I love chocolate chip cookies. Nestle Toll House morsels are the best. But she's not working for Nestle because she believes in the vision of Nestle and the mission of Nestle. Nestle is a Fortune 100 multi-billion-dollar corporation and good, bad, and ugly in Nestle. And she works for a paycheck there. But we both know that even though I'm doing what I'm doing because I love it and getting paid for it, and she's doing what she's doing because for the income and getting paid for it, that neither one of us on our good days, sometimes we slip, but on our good days, our work and our focus isn't on making the money. It's not for, you know the difference though, right? I mean, you need to get paid. We have bills, we have kids. You know, y'all are expensive back there, by the way. You know that? You're worth it. You are worth it, but you're expensive. And we got to earn money so our kids get food and clothing and sporting equipment and education and housing and all of these kinds of things. And we need that. So we get paid, but we're not working for the money. When we slide into working for the money, then all sorts of bad things happen. Daniel understood this. This was the other one. This was the handwriting on the wall episode. And once again, no one could read the writing. They couldn't interpret it. Daniel did. The king at that point set up a reward. Anyone can do it, gets a reward. Now, and Daniel says, "Now I've heard that you're able," no, this is the king. "Now I've heard that you're able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." We know It's a virtual certainty that Daniel was getting paid to do the work that he was doing, compensated in meaningful ways. We don't know why. There's no explanation given as to exactly why Daniel turned down these rewards. But it was clear that Daniel's motivation wasn't get all I can and get out. His motivation was to serve the king and to serve God. To serve the God and serve the king. Keep your rewards. Here's the answer you're looking for. This is my job. The job that God has given me and you have given me in your kingdom. He wasn't working for the earthly rewards. He was working for God. These are the things, what it is. And again, nothing new. Nothing new here. Don't make money the focus of your work and your schooling. A lot of people make their lives miserable by simply making the accumulation of wealth the goal of their lives and the goal of their education. Work well and honestly. Don't be corrupt. Don't be lazy. Don't be incompetent in your work. Work well and work honestly. Be as godly as you can be in the environment that you're in. Humbly be as godly as you can be in the environment that you're in. And pray. Make prayer a regular part of your life, praying including for your work and your school and those things. That's how we do it. Nothing crazy, nothing weird, nothing strange. This is by the grace of God. This commandment was within our reach as we lay down our lives at work and at school.